Hey everyone, I thought I would just kind of go through some of the basics of what Karen and I reviewed on May 11th because the video didn't work and the technology was not working very well. So I'm going to just kind of go over the slides with a lot of them cut out and go through some of these feature examples again so that you can um, see kind of what was difficult to see because of the technology breakdowns. So anyway, yes, Karen, Martin, and I did a basic Excel management training. We didn't go too much into features or formulas, things like that. But Karen is a certified Excel um, consultant, and I am a consultant working with form design and policy for the homeless data system. So basically, when we talked here about our startup considerations, I did add a slide that I will send to you so you can kind of see an example. But when you're talking about your planning for your spreadsheet, Karen went over the fact that you need to talk about the intention of your tracking system. So we talked about a little bit about who is your audience, and generally you're going to think of two entities. One is your funder, and they will give you guidelines from which to submit summary data or even detailed data to them. And the second would be your board of directors. Those are the two. There are many other audiences. Your program managers might want to be reviewing, hopefully with their staff, the results of the service work that you've done. So program managers are an audience. And along that line, so are staff. And then if you're being a really transparent nonprofit, your clients can also be an audience that you could share your successes and areas for improvement with your clients. So that is kind of an idea of your audience. The reporting formats and frequency are something that you need to consider. And so over here on the screenshot that says report specification, we actually use a report specification form when somebody asks us to write a report, and you'll get some ideas about what's the name of the report, who's going to print the report, what kind of report is it? Is it going to be on spreadsheets, PDFs, or some other report writer? How often would you report it? We typically type in the project description. This can be done on an Excel sheet. This is an example in FileMaker Pro, but it can be done on an Excel sheet. And I would highly recommend that when you're designing your programs and you put your data initiative into your programs, you also come up with a report specification form for that. Then we want to know, what are your data sources? Are you using hard copy assessments or intake sheets from somebody else that you are supposed to create a data collection system for? Or are you creating your own intake sheets? And there's lots of examples around and about creating forms that not only are equitable forms, but also drive client engagement. I know, as I mentioned, clients have been interviewed many times, and I think that they have lost trust in our system to some extent. So there are a lot of guidance, if you just Google, forms and intake design. And then from that, you need to write a list of the data fields that you need. So what do you need to track? And again, you'll either be told what to track by your funder, but you can also, I'll send the PDF of 60 decibels, which is a great white paper on how to create data collection systems for impact, not only for compliance, but for impact, so you can get some ideas out of that. And your data sources, again, they might be just, your form, and you're going to start typing stuff in, or you are coming up with something as you go along, and that's fine. The other planning consideration is client privacy and security. And again, just quickly, you don't want to transport client data through email easily. You can use some upload platforms like ShareFile is one of them. Google Docs is one, but I don't think people like to use that quite as well. Dropbox is another example. So if you're going to transmit forms with what we call PPI, personally protected information, that's typically social security number, driver's license number, the client's full name and their date of birth, the city that they were born on, any combination of those three can make a positive ID for a client. So you never want to transmit, even internally to your own agency. You don't want to email spreadsheets around. Just keep them on the network. And the last area was the plan, growth, or data integration. So what this means is the cleaner your spreadsheet is when you start these new programs, the easier it will be if your agency grows and scales and wants to become get their own software for whatever reason, then your data is very clean and can be without much difficulty imported into a new platform. And I mentioned that Apricot 360 is being used in Sonoma County. So you just want to have these spreadsheets as clean, which means the columns all need to be very relevant. So those are some startup considerations. Also on the cheat sheet that I'm going to send you, Karen had mentioned some wireframing. And so basically that's what we'll get into with some of the technical areas, but wireframing, as Karen was demonstrated, you can just simply draw out on a sheet of paper, like the tabs that you want on your spreadsheet, make sure that those are in logical order for your users. We talked about maybe one master spreadsheet with tabs for your reporting period, so you could just filter your data, which I'll show you in a second, and go ahead and copy that date range to a tab that says, for instance, March or June, and that would be from where you drew so you have that data set preserved for what you've done to submit to any kind of reporting. So these are things that really, before you sit down at the spreadsheet, and Karen and I both laughed about that, you never want to sit down at the spreadsheet just to begin. You want to have these kind of things written down or in mind, create a little report specification form for your agency, and kind of talk about what you're going to do and fashion that all out. So those are some of the planning considerations that we talk about. All right, spreadsheet features I'm going to go into, so let's just review a couple of those key features that Karen was going over. And here's the spreadsheet she was kind of showing everyone. And the first thing I've done here, I will increase the size of the screen, is I have applied filters to the top row, which are the labels or the column headers. And you just do this simply by clicking across the row, and then you want to go up here to your data command on your Excel version, and you want to click filter. Notice if I uncheck filter, the little arrows that are on the fields go away, but if I check filter, they show back up. So it's great. Filters are just wonderful. They get you very close to actually being in a desktop class database. And for instance, once filters are applied, you can do a lot of things with the columns. You can sort the columns by ascending or descending, or you can unselect everything and say, I only want to see family sizes of 5. And there are not that many, as opposed to if we uncheck 5, we would click 1 and see. So you can see there's a lot more. And then to return everything, you can either click that and you'll see that the filter has essentially de facto been cleared. And you can do, all kinds of things with filters. I like them too. For instance, if this were the date that you'd serve somebody, you can actually say, I want to find all of my services delivered between or after a certain date. So let's put in March 22, and then you can do that and auto apply. I'm sorry, yeah, 03. Or you can actually uncheck a year or check a year and see only the year, and then expand that, and you can uncheck everything here except for March. And then, as we talked in the session, you can just highlight these rows. Don't take them away, don't cut them or don't delete them, just right click copy them and paste them onto another tab you might down here that you'd labeled March. So that's the way to use those filters. They're very, 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 very handy, and there's some information about more functionality with filters on one of my cheat sheets for you. Now let's talk about data validation, because what I had done here, and by the way, I'm going to clear the filter altogether and it returns all the data, so nothing's gone, it's just suppressed and hidden. But I did want to kind of go over again what Karen was talking about in regard to data validation. I really like this feature. So I had just clipped out a part of the raw data and put it on this screen, and I inserted some columns to show you the difference between something that's validated and not validated. So here we could just type anything into the field that we wanted to, but it doesn't really match the format of what we want. We want to only know assessor numbers. So over here I've created a validated list But see how many values for Assessor 01 are in the list? And all the assessors are in there because I pasted the whole list as my basis for the value. So I'll go to that tab in a minute about how to clean that up. But then here, for instance, if we made a mistake and we typed in numbers when we needed a date, I've also validated that to be a number and not a date, so it won't let your user make that kind of mistake. And again, this is very common, that without this data validation feature, you get this kind of information, you get this kind of like data integrity problem where you might type in a text field, my dog Spot, when it was supposed to be a dollar field. So, and then the third one was what I've done is validated the intake person's initials. And so let me put in my name and see, it will say it's a restricted cell because I only validated for a text string of 3. So again, to do something like this, there you go. If you insert a column and you go into this first cell, and then on your computer, if you look for the data tab right here, and you look for data validation, that's how to get to this window. And you get choices here about what you can add. So for instance, if I wanted to be able to add a decimal, and I want to say it's between 0 and 1, right? So then if I type in the number 2, I should get an error. But if I type in the number 0.01, I should be okay. And then you can go ahead and format those things as well. But just remember to explore this data validation feature. And the other thing that's important to remember is once you do validate something, you have to copy it down, even if you don't have the values in there. Because if I type in $5 in any cell, but it's because I've put my mouse on the little handle and pulled it down to the bottom. So data validation, do not forget to do. Now, how are we going to fix this problem with this dropdown that has many, many, many Assessor 01s? Well, the reason it does is because the list that it's pointing to, which is over on this tab, you don't need to put your list on the same spreadsheet. You can do it on another tab. I just copied over all the values from the raw data sheet. But watch what happens if I actually highlight this whole list, and then I go back up to this data command right here, and I do remove duplicates, and it's going to be in this column G, and then it's going to say 58 duplicates were found, but now it's left me with just the values that were unique. And at this point, if I look at my list, I have a much smaller list. So when you have lots of duplicate values before you create your list, make sure that you deduplicate them on a different sheet. And it's probably even a good idea to just have a different sheet named list values, and you can copy all your list values over here to do that. So that's how that kind of works. One thing I would like to show you is on a couple other things I don't know that we touched on. I'm very much a fan of the field naming conventions again, and so these field naming conventions, if I just click up here and I double click in between, I can see all of the labels here. So here's voucher referral date made, but you might have a very strong long label on your spreadsheet that goes, you know, like out to here, and that really just gets confusing. So sometimes what I do on these longer labels is I rename them. But first, before I do that, I right click right on that cell with the label, and then what I do is I do add new note, and I say original field name, you know, something like that. And then I say, you know, and I just paste in the whole field name. So you see a note here, and now I can actually rename this. I like to do this because sometimes I want to make sure that these longer fields that have been changed map back to the hard copy assessment, and there's always kind of a tie in between. So I do like to do that, but if you can, just keep your field labels very, very short and relevant to what's going on. So again, filters are here. By doing this, you see the little arrow show up. This one is looking at all the unique values, but like in the case of age today, you'll see lots and lots and lots of different values. And if you want to find something between, let's say, you want to find something between 35 and 50, that will see how that shortens the list there. So filters, I can't stress enough, are so important. So I think that's all for the critical features that we went over. There were, I know that Karen was demonstrating some quick keys. So those I've got a link to in my quick sheet that if I just hit shift and down, or let's see, yeah, it's different on the Mac. It will grab the whole section. So there's a link to, on my Excel sheet that I'm sending to you, there's a link to that so you can see how that works. All right, so let's go back here. Again, field names, short conventions, but if you don't want to lose the audit trail, just create a cell note. And then the other thing that we didn't go over that I thought was a good idea that we kind of talked about a little bit was avoiding duplicate records. And this gets into a problem. If you're serving somebody multiple times, you are going to have multiple records in the spreadsheet, and that's fine. But these filters are really great for if I unapply the filter and I'm in my master spreadsheet right here, if I want to see if a person's been in here twice and their name was, or their client ID was 24170, you can actually filter for that, and then you can just, for your record, copy it down, right? Oops, should have copied it down. Copy down what was there before, and then just put a new date in. And then that way you kind of watch duplicates, which is a difficult thing to do in Excel because you do want to have the same reference to the client, but you don't want to have the same date. And maybe their family changed, so you want to do something like that. Or maybe, their age today was something different, or the ability to find them now is poor. So you can just apply filters and find the client. Just pretend you're looking them up by name right here, and then see what you have. And so that's important to do. And then just as a note, that if you just ever go into a larger platform, something that a data cleaning expert will do will be to look for combinations of duplicates. So for instance, the record that I just made, they would want to know that even though that client was in here 2, 3, 4, 5, 7 times, whatever, they don't have the similar service date. So they'll do some data cleaning and duplicate checking, and then they would return that to the agency and ask you if that is all accurate. So those are some of the features that we did go over. Data validation, again, just poke around on that. But remember, if you've got a long column of values that that have repeated values, and you want to deduplicate it for a better to-do list, for a better list, you might want to deduplicate everything over on your other tab. All right. Integrity, data dictionary. We went over this, and this is kind of a small shot, but it's more so in my little quick guide that I'm going to send you. Just remember that whether you write out a spreadsheet on Excel, if you write out a spreadsheet columns on a wireframe, or you make a list just on a sheet of paper for what you're going to want to do, you are in essence you're creating a data dictionary. Now this screenshot is a very formal data dictionary example because we have like what we call the way that the field gets named on the interface, the way the field gets named in the back end, what kind of field it is, text or phone, does it get validated, and then like for instance, here's your validation, like zip code. On this particular example, we didn't let it go to 9 characters, we only did up to 5 characters. So it's a good idea to just create anything with a little data dictionary, even if it's just writing it down before you start to go into Excel. And oftentimes what I do in Excel is if I want to really see what fields I'm putting in there, I will put the fields in an Excel sheet, just a blank sheet, vertically first before I put them across as columns, just so I can get the whole scope of the spreadsheet. The second thing is that rows are single records. So you don't want to duplicate the same service date for the same person for the same service and the same note. You don't want to do that. You want to make sure that you have unique rows for everything you've got. Columns are single variables, and what that means again is if you have a column that is labeled as telephone number, you don't want to be putting income amounts in that column. You want to keep it all very specific to what the purpose of the column is. So that's where the data validation becomes very handy. Avoid nulls. So what nulls are mean empty data values, and really this comes back to the design of your assessment. You don't want to really design an assessment that's automatically going to have a plethora of null values. That's just not a good design. So, if you can even in data validation validate something can't be empty. So that's one of the features in data validation. So if somebody's sending hard copies into your agency where there are a lot of empty spaces, there's a little bit more training that's going to be needed on your assessment form. And then reduce free-form text fields, and again, I'll show you what that means. It's just those note fields. If I go here and I say the data file Excel, and I have text fields right here, if you get a lot of the same types of values coming into text fields, like somebody who's losing housing or whatever seems to be common as you start to put the entries in, you're going to probably want to go back and create a column for that with a list of values. You don't want to really have just a ton of notes. Those are kind of a last-ditch resort. Or you could have check boxes like family is losing housing or staying in a rental, anything that's common. So when I design forms and I have these text fields, I kind of watch them for the first 2 weeks to see if they are coming up with recurrent themes, and then I make those be their own column or field. All right. Okay, and then the last thing is these file naming conventions, and this was just an example. I put other examples in the quick guide, but make sure you put all of your files in a folder, and then as you're working on them, I just like to version them because things can get corrupted or they can get lost, and you can always go back to a former version. But let's say I had 20 different versions in here that went back to, say, October of 2021. I just delete the old versions when I'm pretty solid on the worksheet and leave the last few versions in place. So that's something to watch out too. I would never personally want to do just one spreadsheet version. We've lost data that way before, and it's not an enjoyable experience at all. So okay, and then the last thing we kind of went over was like maybe having just a one sheet of agency policies that relate to your own spreadsheets, like who gets to work on the spreadsheet, who reviews the spreadsheet, what your data privacy and transmission protocols are. And again, as Karen was mentioning, you can put those all on the welcome page of the spreadsheet. It's just a dedicated tab. So I highly recommend writing down your rules for spreadsheet creation, storage, use policy, even upper, lower, title case, data validation fields, things like that. Create just an individual spreadsheet guide for all of your new hires if they're not familiar with how you want to manage your spreadsheets. And then when you get a new staff person, and especially a volunteer going on something very important on a new spreadsheet, make sure that somebody like a program manager reviews the first week. It's very important in data management that somebody be reviewing a new person's work early, right out of the gate, because you can correct anything they've done that's not validated, and they can learn immediately and take that forward, so you don't have a big thing of data not in integrity toward the end of, like, let's say your first quarter of operation. Password protection, I will just kind of go over that just very quickly to show you on this quick guide that password protection is another feature that we really talk about. And if we don't want anybody to change this entire sheet, if we go up to review and protect sheet, you can put your own password in here, but you've got to write it down. You can, there's a way that I've linked to that you can unlock some of the cells for entry but lock everything around it. But basically, when I transmit spreadsheets with no personal information but that I do not want to be changed, like you're sending things to a funder, if you don't send it in a PDF, then I would lock each sheet so that nothing can be changed. I'm kind of, I used to do auditing, and so I really like the lock sheets. So anyway, and then here's your kind of a versioning example of within the spreadsheet, if you're going to do the welcome plate page, if you're on your master spreadsheet, who versioned it, what was the date that it was distributed, and who did you send it to, and why, so that people can, if the dates, if you haven't made different file versions, you can know what was done on the master. And I would definitely name the master sheet with MSTR at the end or at the beginning or somewhere embedded in the sheet. Periodic data review and cleansing. I can't stress enough that for your reporting that you do this early and often. You have somebody who's really seasoned in your agency looking over how your staff is adding that new data, and just look on you by using filters, look for anomalies in the columns. So if you didn't validate and you come to your filter and you see Teddy Pierce as opposed to assessor with a number, that's a data integrity issue. And so if you're not validating things, you should have somebody check that over. So that's a really good thing to do. Okay, last thing I was going to go over here was this quick sheet, and I will send this out to everybody. You're going to get this. It's going to be locked. But here's just like a quick guide of some of the things we had gone over. You're not going to read this all at once. It will kind of take place over time. And here's a sample data dictionary, again, blown up so you can kind of see how we do it in a more formal way. Here's a data brief that I just like some of these formats that I've seen. These are all Excel sheets, but you can, with a little bit more skill using pivot tables and things like that, or even if you just want to key in the numbers, you can do nice layouts like this that could be locked first of all and presented to your board or your program managers. Here's some links up to how to create those formulas and use data validation. And I did here put the MAC numbers link in so you can get instructions on that. Here's a sample welcome page, and this is kind of like what Karen was talking about, where you might put your versioning. You might put metadata here, like, who created the report, last time it was updated, file naming conventions. If you even want to embed some of your policy instructions on the welcome page, that's a great idea. And then this last area is other resources, and these are just some, if you really want to get down and dirty about learning about data management, you can click right up out of here to these places, and I will include the 60 decibels white paper. And then here was just, I like this sample wireframe that it's created in Excel, and you don't need to create titles like this, but it's just how some people use the concept of wireframing to do design before they really sit down to create anything in the spreadsheet. So hope that is all good information for you, and we went just a little bit slower, and let us know if you have questions.